What's next for Ohio? Welcome to Columbus on the Record. For the winners of last week's election, the credit taking continues. For the losers, the finger pointing continues. Here in Ohio, Democrats are basically at a loss. Come January, they will have just one statewide elected official, Supreme Court Justice Jennifer Brunner. But they have a sliver of hope. If history serves, the 2026 midterm elections will favor Democrats, the party out of power in the White House. Every statewide executive post will be on the ballot, and 2026 will feature a special election to fill the remainder of J.D. Vance's U.S. Senate seat. And that's just the politics. Ohioans wait to see what President-elect Trump's policy changes will mean for the state. Herb Asher, Democrats are a slight minority in Washington, a major minority here in Columbus. What should their plan be over the next 2 years?
Well, I'm glad you said 2 years, because they have a series of questions to address that'll take a longer-term perspective, but they really need to be focusing on 2026. And here in Ohio, as we all know, the Democrats don't have much of a farm team. And the Republicans will have incumbents running for most offices. So who are the Democrats going to have lead their ticket? And of course, there's a lot of discussion right now about Sherrod Brown running for governor. And I don't know whether Sherrod wants to run for governor, but if he did, it in fact would be an easy thing. Then you have to assemble the rest of the ticket. And again, there's not very many prominent names out there. But if you start now, and then you hope for a couple of things. And as you said, Mike, oftentimes the midterm election is a problem for the incumbent party because things aren't going that well. So that could be helpful. The Republicans could have a really bitter primary.
That's my question to Gene. It's almost like there's too many Republicans and not enough Democrats.
Yes.
Right now. I mean, they're all Dave Yost and John Husted both want to be governor.
And Bob Sprague.
Yep.
And players to be named later.
Vivek Ramaswamy, maybe.
Yeah, you know, the list goes long on that. Two things come to mind. First of all, Peter Turchin wrote an excellent book called Secular Cycles, and basically what you're going to see is a circular firing squad. I've said on the show many a time. You know, and being Republicans, we all use high caliber automatic weapons, and it's going to be a bloodbath. It won't be pretty to see. The thing is, though, is that I want to mention midterms. So I'm a political cyclist. If this really is the fourth turning, the 80-year cycle, and I'm not completely sure it is, because some indications it is, in 1932, FDR was that transformational president. His midterms, the Democrats picked up 9 U.S. Senate seats. So do not necessarily think this is going to be a bad year. Next cycle is going to be a bad cycle for Republicans.
Jesse Baumert, are Democrats, I mean, Tim Ryan, he had said he's not going to run again. This week he said, well, I'm looking at it again. You look at Amy Acton, she's supposed to be considering a run for governor. Could Democrats come up with a team to run statewide offices in 2 years? What's the thinking?
I mean, they're going to have to, right? We have a two-party system in Ohio, but as we've said, Sherrod Brown remains the most prominent, well-known Democrat in the state of Ohio, even despite his loss by 3 or 4 percentage points last week. And so it's really for him to decide whether he wants to stay in, whether he would want to run in that open Senate race, whether he would want to run for governor. And then I think you'll see the names that you mentioned fall in line. About the Republican primaries being messy, we've watched some pretty messy Senate primaries on the Republican side, only for the candidates to come out and then win in the general election. So I don't know if a messy primary is necessarily going to be a problem for the GOP.
Sherrod Brown's 72 years old. And the last time this happened, Ted Strickland lost the race for governor, came back a couple years later, ran for U.S. Senate against Rob Portman, did not fare well. Does Sherrod Brown just say, you know, I lost, had a good career, 40 plus years in public service, I'm going to do something else?
72? You think that's old?
I know he's 5 years younger than Mike DeWine, I believe.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I don't think that the American people think that's old. I mean, look at who they just elected for president. He's older. And, you know, I think that you know, Sherrod Brown has always been the type of person that, you know, he runs 1,000,000 miles a minute. He's got a lot of energy. He can speak coherently, and he has his act together as far as that's concerned. So I think, you know, the age is not going to be the big deal for Sherrod Brown. I think the problem is that the Democrats in Ohio have a real structural problem with having community, being on ground in their communities. If you look at the various Democratic parties throughout Ohio, some of them don't even have an apparatus in their county.
Yeah, the urban areas do. And that's the question I have for Herb. What about the mayors? Andy Ginther in Columbus, Justin Bibb in Cleveland, Aftab Puraval in Cincinnati.
And Sean Mollison in Akron or whatever.
Yep.
And you know, somehow maybe Aftab, but I don't see any of them being a Michael Coleman, who you immediately would say this could be a statewide candidate. But certainly you have to look there. But I think the point you were making, you know, you look at Western Ohio, it's heavily Republican, but it's gotten even more Republican. And on the ground, the Democrats don't exist. So how do you build a party in 88 counties or even in 12 counties? It's, you know, it's a party limited to really 6 to 8 counties. And I think that's a challenge for them. But again, they're partly at the mercy of things they can't control. The economy, the state of the country, the state of the GOP. And I was thinking, you know, like that if Bob Bennett were still alive, you remember how
Former
good
GOP chair from
yes,
Ohio.
how good he was in avoiding Republican primaries.
So I do have to comment on what Joe mentioned here. As it's nice to know 72 is not old because I'm 71, so I have a lot to look forward to apparently. But it can be done. It was done under Ted Strickland in his first campaign in 2006. He kept the bleeding down in a lot of the rural counties. This goes to your point. But Herb's exactly right. The Ohio Democratic Party, I'm a believer in, as the Bible says, iron sharpens iron. And I think the Republicans do best when there's a fully functional Democrat Party. And the index in this state is not 11 or 8 Republican. I've always said on this show it's 3.7% based upon Rich Cordray versus Mike DeWine. And what did Sherrod lose by?
3.7.
Yeah. So that's the real margin. And by the way, the Democrats around the State House were all hoping that Sherrod was going to lose because they all want jobs in an administration.
All right, let's get to the next topic. Sometime in the next 2 months or so, J.D. Vance will resign his U.S. Senate seat to become the 50th Vice President of the United States. The person who will succeed him remains uncertain, perhaps even to the man who will appoint him or her. That man, of course, is Governor DeWine. The only thing we know for sure is that DeWine will pick a Republican. The names under consideration include probably every statewide Republican office holder, State Senator Matt Dolan and former Ohio Republican Party Chair Jane Timken. One possible appointee, Ohio businessman and former presidential candidate Vivek Ramaswamy, likely is out of the running because President Trump has named him a co-director of an effort to cut government waste. Gene Krebs, who are you betting on?
Matt Dolan, but as my wife constantly reminds me, I have a horrible record of being right on this
I don't
stuff.
think Matt Dolan wants to hear what you just said, but that's okay.
Yeah.
Why do you think he's a strong candidate?
One, I think that he can. First of all, you want somebody who can win. I was always backing Matt in this last primary because I knew that if Matt was the candidate for us, we would not have to spend hundreds of millions of dollars on that. That Matt would be able to take out Sherrod and it'd be a much cheaper race. We wouldn't have to spend so much money. And I think that's the thing to look forward to in 2 years, because I think we probably lost several Senate seats around the country because we blew all the money here in Ohio. And I think he'd do a credible job. Also, I think Trump probably knows the family because the Dolans, in addition to owning Madison Square Gardens, the Dolan family has a large holdings in the New York's real estate market.
Who are Democrats hoping gets the nod? Jim Jordan? His name is out there, not speculation, not really credible of this. But
Look, Democrats, again, would love to see the Republicans go to the far, far right, and that gives them a greater opportunity. I wonder whether I think Dolan would be an excellent legislator, But that's not the criteria that really is going to dominate. I think the two criteria, one will be, can he hold on to the seat and win the seat? And then we'll have to see how much Donald Trump gets involved in this.
That's my question for Jesse. How much of a, I mean, will DeWine just do what Trump wants? Will he go rogue? What is the level of influence? What's the thinking at the State House about how much Trump is going to influence this election?
Well, Mike DeWine is really looking for a bit of a unicorn here. He's looking for someone who's going to appeal to be that workhorse and not a show horse, to be a real serious legislator. Mike DeWine, having served in Congress, knows about the job and takes it very seriously. So that type of candidate, but he also needs someone who's going to be able to win a primary, who's going to be able to raise a lot of money in a very short period of time, because that person will have to run in 2026. And so people who might win a primary in Ohio's Republican GOP are not necessarily the people who might, be the serious legislator. And so you're trying to hit the best of both worlds there that's going to appease both Trump loyalists and the kind of middle of the road Republican.
Joe, I mean, that list, he must be, well, we heard last week he was getting calls from county commissioners and people who really had kind of no shot, but they were putting their name in, give them credit, I guess.
Yeah.
But I mean, when do we expect this decision? I mean, Vance doesn't take office until January 20th,
Oh, personally, I expect it on a Friday afternoon at 4:45. but that's by the way, that's for
usually
journalists.
bad news. It's just
Yeah,
absolutely
for
bad
journalists,
news.
that's the time you don't want it to come in. So, but I think that the governor is not rash. He usually takes some thought when he does something, and I think we will know fairly soon. But I don't think we're going to know maybe within the next week. But I think he'll give it some thought and he'll appoint someone. But I think he will take some consideration into what President-elect Trump wants. I think he also will look at who voted in this election and how did they vote and what does the Ohio people want to accept.
So just to clarify, 30th floor has not called me. Okay, but
Did you call them?
No. But the other thing to keep in mind, too, is that there's another wild card on this that Mike's got to keep in mind on all of this, which is the trials going on regarding First Energy a la House Bill 6. And there's going to be a lot of mud thrown around about this in the next year or so. So whoever he picks has to be in a position where there's no chance of mud being tossed on them. So once again, that's Matt Dolan, who voted for House Bill 6, but had no real involvement in it.
But one thing I'd like to point out, Gene, with all due respect, is
Okay.
we've had House Bill 6 going on for 4 years now, and I have seen no repercussion of House Bill 6 really in any of the elections. Even though the people have tried to throw it up, it just hasn't resonated.
I have to tell you, I think that points to the absolute mind-boggling incompetence of the Ohio Democratic Party. Yeah. I can design a campaign in about 15 seconds that would cut everybody off at the knees.
But do you think House Bill 6 could show up in Republican primaries? And I think, David Yost is actually hinting at that. And we know that Yost is going to go after Husted. And
I have a way it could show up in the Republican primary. Our next topic, there is a new movement in Ohio. It is the Free Larry movement. Right now, it's a movement of two. Former House Speaker Larry Householder and his campaign lawyer, Scott Pullins. Householder is serving a 20-year sentence in federal prison for leading a $60 million bribery scheme, House Bill 6, to bail out the two nuclear power plants in northern Ohio. Pullins says they will ask soon-to-be President Trump to show mercy, either through a pardon or a commutation of his sentence. Trump has granted clemency to corrupt politicians before, former Arizona Sheriff Joe Arpaio and former Illinois Governor Rod Blagojevich, for example. Householder was a loyal Trump supporter, serving as the only Ohio politician who spoke at the 2016 GOP convention in Cleveland, which nominated Trump. Jesse Balmert, how are State House folks viewing this? It's certainly a long shot, I would say, but with Trump, there's no such thing as a long shot, probably.
Yeah, I would say, he has a better shot with President-elect Trump than he did with current President Biden. So you got to go for it, and we'll see what happens from there. I think a number of people at the State House have been moving on from Larry Householder, and it doesn't necessarily benefit them to be in close connection with him nowadays. So we shall see.
Gene, I'm guessing John Husted, Dave Yost, they don't want to see a pardon.
No, but so there's no secret that when House Bill 6 was going on, there was a fair amount of entanglement with the Trump's Department of Energy on that, which is something nobody talks about very much. And so if I were Donald Trump, I would want to keep Larry Householder quiet and not suddenly go to the feds and say, can you get me out of this Iron Bar Motel if I tell you everything you want to know about my involvement with the Department of Energy?
The only reason I can think of why Trump might even consider this is it's his way of saying to the public and to the Justice Department, screw you, and say Larry was in fact unfairly treated, just like I've been unfairly treated. But I think it'd be foolish for Donald Trump to get entangled in that. There's no reason to.
It was his prosecutor, Donald Trump's appointed prosecutor, de Villers, who prosecuted this case, who started the prosecution of this case anyway.
Yeah, I agree with what everyone said.
But if he were to get out of prison, out of federal prison, he faces the state charges. And that's why they've indicted him on state charges. And it would be Dave Yost who would be in charge of that prosecution. So that politically, that's a tough spot for him, prosecuting a person that Donald Trump favors and just perhaps pardoned or commuted. Jesse.
Yeah, it's interesting. These state charges are really related to money that was spent on his criminal defense in the federal case, so it's a slightly different set of circumstances, but there's also a charge that Attorney General Yost included in there that would prevent Larry Householder from running for election ever again. Currently, a 20-year prison sentence should probably end a political career, but this would officially prohibit it.
And that, he said it why they were filing these state charges in case, you know, he was saying maybe he got out on appeal or something like that.
If you go back to the previous big scandal in Ohio, CoinGate, what Tom Noe got convicted on was, I think, 1 or 2 years in the federal pen, but got like 15 to 17 years in state charges. So the bigger penalties for these types of corruption charges, when they're exercised, is in the state level.
Is this, we kind of mentioned it briefly, but is this scandal over? Because it has been sort of pushed aside, as Joe mentioned. It really has not had any electoral consequences.
I'd say that the criminal justice system and the civil justice system can be quite slow. And so there is a civil lawsuit that we're having depositions on even this week and next week. There is the criminal case that was brought not just against Householder, but against 2 former First Energy executives. So this is still kind of trickling out. Right now, there's no active criminal investigation from the Department of Justice, from the federal side, but we'll see if that changes going forward.
We're still waiting for the sentencing of the 2 folks who pleaded guilty, Juan Cespedes and Jeff Longstreth. We don't know what they get. It seems to be overdue. I mean, we know what Matt Borges, the former lobbyist, got and what Householder got. And they were the 4 people charged, along with, you know, Neil Clark, who died.
Yeah,
So
who knows?
we shall see.
If somebody tries to exploit it, whether in the context of Republican politics or if somehow the Republicans in 2 years have somebody on the ballot who is linked to it, if the Democrats are halfway smart, which, you know, you seem to question that appropriately at times, but it could be alive again.
But here's an important thing. In the past X number of years, my party has shifted from being the party of business to the party of populism. And if you monitor some of the very Republican sites right now, they're taking an anti-utility stand. They're taking an anti-corporation stand. So this may actually, it goes back to what you said about the primary. Yeah. This could actually be devastating to somebody in a primary because they got backed by the ruling elite who take your money and your electric. And by the way, electric rates will go up this summer because of the auction.
Right. And we're still subsidizing the coal plants.
Power plants in Indiana.
Yeah.
Thank you very much.
All right. At the State House, culture wars continue to clash with the selective enforcement of Ohio's home rule provision. The Constitution in Ohio grants powers to cities and villages to exercise self-government, but at the State House, self-government is a relative term. This week, lawmakers passed a bill that requires transgender school students use the bathrooms that match their birth genders. And lawmakers are considering a bill that would require local school districts allow students to leave school to attend religious classes during the school day. Joe Ingles, it's a constant. home rule is important. We can't mess with home rule, but then we pass these laws that really are very specific to local jurisdictions. What's the thinking among lawmakers? Why they do it in some cases and not others?
Well, because they like one idea and they don't like the other. And, you know, you can
Simple
kind
as
of
that.
make that work any way you want to. But I think that the key with this is these lawmakers that are the Republicans who are backing it like the idea of school choice. They like the idea of letting Christian groups go into schools and have that time out of the day like they do with some of these programs where they can take the students out of the building and do activities with the students and then put them back in. Those are popular ideas, and I think that we're going to see a lot of debate on this, but I'm not so sure that they really care a tremendous amount what local, you know, they're throwing it back saying, oh, well, we'll let the local communities have their say, but the local communities are saying, we don't want to put a policy in place to begin with,
Yeah.
and they don't hear that.
Well, the law would, if passed, would say local schools have to allow it. They just have to come up with a policy to figure out how to do it. But Herb, what is the harm? If you're missing recess or a study hall to leave to go to a religious service. Now, this bill does not say it's just Christian religious service. It could be any religion. What's the harm?
But the practice so far seems to be Christian service and a particular branch of Christianity. So that's a harm. But what you're really saying here is how far do you want to go? If they do this, is there a next step that they'll want to have, the legislature meeting? And again, as you were saying, Mike, the history of home rule, it's been very interesting. If the cities, counties that are Democratic and more progressive do something, they'll simply overrule it. And what's the grounds? Well, say, well, we can't have different statutes in different communities. If you're talking about the red lights or you're talking about guns, it's too difficult for people to traveling from one county to another to have to know. That's nonsense.
How about the transgender bathroom issue? Gene, does it make more sense for that to be legislated on a local level, or should it be statewide? I'm thinking more to prevent discrimination against transgender students rather than because the difference is you come from rural Ohio. Your community is much different than Cleveland or Columbus.
Look, on that issue, I've always taken the attitude you need to go slow on that. There was a report done this summer by Dr. Cass out of Great Britain that said that you need to be very, very cautious about underage hormone therapies and things like that. So my advice is, what they should have done is said, let's just do a 5-year moratorium on underage stuff and just study it for a while longer. Instead, you've got this rush to judgment on both sides. But part of this is being driven, and here's my challenge to the 3 people with the media sitting here, is double check my numbers on this. I think that in the next Ohio House of Representatives, the largest profession outside of being a member will be a lawyer, of course, but the second largest may be a Pentecostal preacher.
Interesting.
And I think double check my math on that.
There's some, for sure.
Yeah, I would say also that particular legislation that passed this week that we expect Governor Mike DeWine is going to sign, it also affects universities and colleges, including private universities.
This is the bathroom
The
bill.
bathroom bill. And I think it'll be really interesting. I'm sure we'll see litigation over that and like how far can the state government influence, particularly private, particularly universities for where adults are going to school.
The one question I have about the bathroom bill is who is going to police it? I mean, who's going to stand there and say, oh, that person can't go in that bathroom? It's a really hard thing, and the law or the bill is very silent about that. So I think we're going to see some questions about that. If the governor does sign it into law and it does get put in place, there are still going to be questions about who's using the bathroom and when.
Should we just do away with the home rule provision?
Or strengthen it.
Yep. All right. We'll see.
Yeah.
Well, that does say that the local law is superseded by state law, and that's what happens every time. So let's get to our final off-the-record parting shots, and Gene, we'll start with you.
The week before the election, we buried former Speaker Joanne Davidson. And then on election night, we buried what was left of the Republican Chamber of Commerce Republican. Okay, and she personified that Chamber of Commerce Republican. It's all very ironic and very appropriate. The ODP, our Democratic Party's in chaos. The Chamber Republicans have nowhere to go. I'm fully expecting in the next few years you're going to hear more chatter about a third party arising from the ashes of both.
Herb.
I think next year, look very carefully at what the legislature in Ohio does, as well as the Congress actually, but what the legislature does with respect to the reproductive rights amendment that we approved in Ohio by a substantial margin, and look to see if they play games about the word viability.
Okay. Joe.
I think we're talking about the parties doing a postmortem, but I think the media needs to do a postmortem because obviously a lot of people who voted are saying, well, I didn't know that, I didn't know that. Somewhere we missed the boat because if people didn't know it, they're not reading what we're saying, listening, seeing what we're saying. We need to figure out as the media how we can really get in front of folks, especially when they're voters and they go vote. They need to know.
Jesse.
An unlikely contender in the U.S. Senate race threw her hat in, Dolly DeWine. This might smack of nepotism, and I don't know if the dog is actually old enough, but everyone is interested.
Like those lawn signs we saw of the pets running for office. Dolly DeWine. She needs a slogan. My off-the-record comment, we're looking for things that will give us hope, and we got one this week when The Onion bought InfoWars. Irony knows no bounds. Terrific story. That is Columbus on the Record for this week. We urge you to continue the conversation on Facebook, and you can watch us anytime on your time at our website, wosu.org/COTR, and YouTube and the PBS app. I'm Mike Thompson. Have a good week.